Gotta fix my hood. in the hood. We are live. It's 9:41 in the morning. Get your projects done. What projects do you have? My project today is to do an oil video. So we're going to compare different oil weights and different oil types. So hopefully I'll be able to get that video up today. Right now, the spark plug video is doing very well. The E3 versus the NGK laser platinums versus the Autolite coppers. And we got some interesting things to talk about. So hopefully you guys have seen the video. If you haven't, please go check that out. It's up now. The interesting thing is in the thumbnail, we have the Autolite or the NGK laser platinums, and they're a 4-prong with the prongs to the outer ring of the center electrode. So that one of the questions that people or comments that people made, and the questions, can you please test side gap plugs? So side gap plug is from the center electrode. What you do, rather than the electrode overhanging the tip, we cut back the center electrode so it's to the side and adjacent to the edge. So the sharp edge and the sharp edge, and then the spark is easier for it to jump. And does that gain any power? Does it gain any power? So the question is. There are a lot of things, and guys got into the conductivity of the different metals and all kinds of stuff. And while you could look at that stuff and go, yeah, gold is more conductive, or silver is more conductive, or copper is, or whatever, these precious metals, the question isn't that. The question is, guys were talking about ohming them and seeing what is the least amount of resistance and all that, and all that's good. It's good information. But that's not the question when we're doing this test. The question is there a problem with the conductivity level that the plug has? Is that causing a problem? So if it was causing a problem and you cured it by having more conductivity, then that would be a gain. If they all have, if a problem occurs at 50% conductivity and all of these have 95%, none of them are going to have a problem. And that's really what we're seeing here. That's not a limiting factor. And the side gap thing is also the same thing. In my opinion, side gapping is not going to help you unless that you have a problem with misfires, and this cures that misfire. The little tiny things that people want to talk about, but the flame propagation and the changing the timing, just all sorts of little minutia things. The reality is that when the spark plug, as we showed in this video, that when the spark plugs are working, even the junky setup that I had where we've got 5 NGKs and 2 champions and 1 Bosch of different heat ranges and all kinds of stuff, when those are working, which they always did, when those are working, those make the same power as all the other 3 because it sparks. And when it sparks, as we said, good things happen. So to look at these little tiny things of potential power, like, you get guys, I only use NGK. That's the only one to use on an LS. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not the only one. Obviously, we just showed that other ones do that too. The real question is to set aside like that power thing and to try to argue back and forth about getting 1 horsepower or something, because you shouldn't be looking there for that. It's just not, it's not within the range of repeatability. You should be looking at on these spark plug things, and a lot of guys brought this up, so good on them. It's just longevity. I mean, a copper core plug doesn't normally last as long as these precious metal plugs. Ruthenium, I think, is a new one, and the iridium and platinum. That's why they put those in the factory ones, because they know most people don't ever change their spark plugs. And they want to drive 100,000 miles and not have any problems. And so the OEMs want a motor and a spark plug that will go 100,000 miles or somewhere near there. And the old copper stuff didn't tend to do that. So let me know out there if you've run copper stuff and you've run it for a long time and it's continued to last. I mean, it's not unusual for me to go get stuff from the wrecking yard and run it with the plugs that came in the motor. It's not unusual at all. If the motor's in good shape, like it was running when it came in, we put it up on the dyno and we use the plugs that are in and the wires and the coils and all that. We just put it in there, it fires right up, and it just runs just like it did before the poor vehicle was crashed or whatever, or lost the transmission or whatever else caused it. Hopefully it wasn't an engine that died that caused it to be in the wrecking yard, because then we've got to fix something like we did with that poor 4.8 liter, where the guy tried to glue the rocker back in place. But short of that, if the thing was crashed and was running when it was crashed and the motor comes out, it's going to run, and it's going to run on those high mileage, worn out plugs. It still works and it still makes good power. And only if we're getting misfire, and you could get misfire, the range of misfire is pretty broad. You could go from it misfiring once every 1,000 cycles or 100 cycles or once every 5 cycles or every other cycle, which is bad. And the more times that happens as a percentage, the greater the power loss, and then potentially the greater the power gain if you replace that plug with something that doesn't do that. But that's usually where you get your gains. It's not from a plug type. It's from a plug replacement, and you're replacing one that misfired. Same thing with boost. When we have there's not a plug that's better on a boosted application except for a colder one that again, going from a hot plug to a cold plug may not cure detonation. It will only cure detonation if that was the thing that was causing detonation, and then you fix that. If detonation was caused by the fact that you have super hot inlet air temperatures because you're drawing your air right behind the radiator for your turbo application, and you're not running an intercooler, you're not going to cure that with spark plugs. So the spark plug change going from a hot plug to a cold plug can help, but it's not the cure-all. The other things are the big things: the air fuel, the timing, the inlet air temperature. Plugs are the heat range of the plug is fairly far down. We've run really hot plugs on junkyard turbo things, and it works just fine. But we have cold water going through intercooler. We have cold air going to the turbo. We're not usually running a lot of boost. A lot of times we have good fuel, and so that's never an issue. So the plug itself is, like I said, very kind of a minor thing. But on the turbo applications, when we have really big gaps in them, and then we run it up, and then we get into misfire, and then we bring the gap down, that cures the misfire. Same thing with the bad plug. If we for some reason, if we put a fouled plug in there, or when we first started tuning it, it was the air fuel was down in the 7s before we adjusted it, and it fouled the plug. We take that plug out, we try to clean it and run it again. And sometimes we could bring it back alive. Sometimes we just toss it and put another one in there, and then it works just fine. But if you're curing a misfire caused by a variety of different things, the other thing that people wanted to, obviously related to spark plugs, are spark plug wires, and then coils, and again, you could have 2 coils, one of them that has more spark energy than the other, has a quicker rise time, or whatever the performance aspects of the coil are. But that's not the question. It's like having one throttle body that flows more than the other throttle body. But the small throttle body was already way more throttle body than the motor needed, because it will support 1,000 horsepower, and the other one will support 1,500 horsepower, and your motor's only making 500. So no amount of extra throttle body is going to do anything. And it's the same thing with the coils. If you have coils that are already working and have enough spark energy and are not misfiring, you're not going to get anything from going to a better coil. Even if it's better, it's not better because you didn't need anything that was any better. Same thing with plug wires. The wires that are on it are wrecking yard wires, I'm sure. And you can ohm them out and go, oh yeah, this one is much more conductive. This is better. It's going to send all the juice to it. Well, that's fantastic. But this one is already sending 50 or 80 or 120% more voltage than it needs to do what it needs to do. Having one that sends 150% is not going to get anything because it already has more than enough. Same thing with our throttle body demonstration. So that's usually what happens. And that's why we're seeing these tests where we're not getting huge gains or any kind of gain in the case of the spark plug application, where we're not getting any gains from making these changes, despite the fact that people wanted me to try the pulsar ones or the star ones and all that, all of these fancy different kind of electrode tips and stuff. And in my opinion, the benefit to all of those, like the laser platinum one, platinum's going to last a long time, so that's good. But the 4-prong deal, what it does is gives the spark options to make the jump. And if it can make the jump, then you don't get misfire. And so that can be beneficial. But if it's making the jump every time from a single ground strap, having 4 ground straps, or having a star-shaped one or a V1 or the diamond fire thing, if it's already making the jump, then it's doing all that it needs to do to make the power. So we're going to put a pole up here. Okay, so one of the things that people wanted me to test were these brisk plugs. So I want to know if anybody has ever tried those. So that will be our poll for today. Have you ever tried the brisk spark plugs? Brisk. Like when you jump in cold water. Ooh, that's brisk. Washington's in the house. Allen, Fusion, Burns. East Coast is in the house. How's your Saturday going? Is it There's no way today can be Saturday. I didn't miss that many days. Car farm. Always throwing it out there. Electricity follows the path of least resistance. Having more straps on a plug will not change that. You only need one. That's right. I can get a copper setup to last probably 50,000 miles, but I change them out more often. I think, Alan, I think that's subjective, right? Plasma ignition, again. if the spark plug's already doing what it's supposed to do, I think that the gains or the things that we're not showing are, and I brought this up in the video, and that's just that we're testing for power, and that's probably not what these things excel at. They might excel at other things like emissions and fuel mileage, if that's a possibility. Test nitrous motors exceptionally hard on plugs. I haven't found that to be the case. We run our NA plugs and we run them with nitrous. We normally would put a slightly colder one in there, but it seems to work just fine. Only the spark gap matters the most. It does on boosted applications. On NA motors, we saw you can have a huge variation in plug gap and essentially make the same power. Banger, banger, banger. What size plug gap would you say were too small? We started to lose a little bit of power at 10 on an NA motor. I've melted plugs with nitrous. So was the tune not correct on them? Because nitrous itself won't burn spark plugs out. Alberta's in the house. Dallas, Texas is in the house. Oh, Alan, this is your Saturday? So your work schedule? The CEO of NOS company said most of the power generated with nitrous is the chemical reaction in the combustion chamber. But the chemical reaction is the release of free oxygen molecules, which then burn along with fuel. I've had horrible luck with E3 plugs. This is the first, we've run them before. I've just put them in motors before because we had some, the guys at Westech had some that are stock heat range kind of things. And so we've run them before and they worked just like they did here, but I hadn't ever tested them or compared them to something else until now. No one ever talks about resistor plugs versus non-resistor. I don't remember. Somebody asked me about that. I just told them to look up that's why I supplied the part numbers on the Autolite plugs. But the resistor versus non-resistor, I think, is less of an issue now, right? Minnesota's in the house. Probably cold there, yeah. Burns, yeah. If you've got no fuel coming in, you can definitely torch the spark plug. Side gap with 13-to-1 compression. I honestly don't know how compression is gonna. 13-to-1 compression, a high compression and or boost will be more taxing on the plug and be more problematic with big gaps. But I don't know why a side gap would be any better than a top gap if the gap was small enough. You just want it to jump. And so maybe there's a range where side gap, because of the sharpness of the edges and they're adjacent, but I don't know how because here's something to think about. So if this is your electrode and your side gap to this side, if you're overhung to the other side, is that still side gapped? Because you're going from edge to edge on the other side too. You're just past it. In fact, going all the way across gives you side edges to go from, and the outer bottom edge of the electrode to go down to the center electrode of the ground strap. I mean, so I just I would be really surprised if we side gap plugged and it did anything. Again, like the discussion earlier, if jumping in the gap is the problem, and somehow by side gapping it we've cured the misfire problem, then I could see where that could improve things. So if you have limited ignition strength, maybe an old point ignition or something like that, and you have limited spark energy, and you've cured that by doing that. But again, I don't know if side gapping itself does anything. It's all open and just lets all the goodness go out into the combustion chamber. I don't know if that's the case. So thinking about spark with this train of thought, MSD comes to mind, the idea of multiple spark. Multiple spark usually is better for emissions and drivability and stuff, since it's only happening at lower engine speeds below 3,000. Otherwise, there isn't time to multi-strike it. So for that part of it, it would be better. And then potentially for wide open throttle in that RPM range, that might also be better, but it can't happen at higher engine speeds. When I was working with Michael from ICE Ignition, he sent me a lot of NGK non-resistor plugs to work. Have you tested that, Dave? Have you tested resistor versus non-resistor on something? You think testing with a dome piston would have made a difference? I don't know how the dome would just be more compression, but it could also hurt flame travel. And I don't. Once the spark is initiated, I think that the flame travel after that is the dome piston is going to hurt flame travel after that, not before the initiation of the spark, I think. I've tried split fire and everything else that came down the pipeline, and the only thing that was worth a hoot was Excel U-Groove header plugs, because they were good, reliable header plugs. So were they short? Did they get stuff out of the way? Was that the thing? Hi from South Africa. What's the best spark plug for a boosted 4-cylinder at 25 pounds of boost? The ones that I ran in this, we only ran 17 at Bonneville, or 16 or 17. We ran 29 on the engine dyno, and it was a B-Series Honda. We ran Iridiums. We ran Denso Iridiums, cold ones, IQ 31s. Side gap plug just makes it easier for the air-fuel mixture to find the spark. Okay. But if the spark is initiating on the outer edge of the electrode, it would be the same. So we've only got, have you ever tried brisk plugs? We only got 4% saying yes and 96% saying no. If you have a spark plug with a bunch of electrodes coming out of it like a squid, well, this 4-prong does that. And then the star one, the pulsar one, has that. It has looks like an umbrella, but with a bunch of points out on the end of the umbrella. So it does that. And like we talked about, that would just give it more options for the spark to occur and jump if there was a problem with the 10 others that it couldn't jump from, and potentially eliminate misfire. But if it jumps, when it jumps, is it jumping from the multi-prong deal over to when it makes the jump from whatever the shape is that any different than making it from a regular ground strap to the center electrode? So Racer D, you want me to change the timing for the plug test? I don't think that that's a good idea. So we'd have to, the timing would have to be the same for both spark plugs for it to be a test of the spark plug. Unless one of them responded to timing and that the other one didn't. from the testing that I've done on spark plugs so far, I would be very surprised if I saw any power from any spark plug. AJ, I don't know where you're getting your compression and stuff. Would side gap allow higher compression than the top gap? I don't know why it would do that. Just get the spark from the thing, and then good things will happen. Exactly, Sargy, you get it. Okay, Racer D, we'll try the 985 plugs. Is there a bench tester? You mean for spark plugs? I thought that they had one. Mark Sanchez is telling me that he thought that they had one, like some sort of pressurized chamber or something. But the pressurized chamber doesn't tell us what the spark plug does. It might tell us that with a given amount of voltage or a given amount, whatever ignition system we have set up to it, that it will jump more or less of a gap. But that tells us nothing about power, though. It tells us nothing about power production. The indexing proved by moving a spark plug within the same cubic centimeters at the location of spark plug in that same tiny area is irrelevant. When the spark jumps to the add strap, nothing is better. and I haven't put it up yet, but I've also tested different kinds of tips and different heat ranges and taper plugs versus gasketed plugs, and so it moves the plug in and out. And not to spoil it, but spark plug is not where you should be looking for your power. I'm asking because I don't know if the side gap plug are a lower profile than the top gap plug. The side gapping the plug and indexing that plug could theoretically give you more room on a dome. So it would allow you to potentially have less of a trough in the piston as if it were coming up and interfering with a spark plug. But the amount that you would change that is, I need to look at an example to see if we could if the change in the scallop there because of that would be, a tenth of a cc or something. I just don't know how much that would be. Do a test using antique old school spark plugs versus new plugs. I've done this, and the old school plugs have more spark. They had better copper cores. What is is it a different copper alloy? Did they have more copper in them? What do you think the deal was? Some of the complementary erasers were removing the ground wire altogether. Yeah, they're surface gapping them, and I've seen that, and that's that was the question on this one. Is that 4-prong plug? Is that, I think I'll probably show you a picture of that. Yeah, here we go. That would, I think you can kind of see that. See this photo right here. So that's the thumbnail that's up. So that would kind of be more of a side gap and very open for a side gap, although it has prongs all the way around it. So does that destroy our flame front or the ability for the air-fuel mixture to get in there past that cage? But that's not even it's not even side gapping overhang the edge of the center electrode. It's pretty far away from it, but it's not surface gap. Like, it doesn't go the electrodes aren't even cut all the way down to here. So again, are we just playing games with these different designs? Let's see. I ran out of light plugs in my 88 Firebird for a specific reason. I burned about as much oil as I did gas, and now lights were cheaper. That's definitely something to consider. Top gap fuel burn versus side gap fuel burn. In the video that I did, I also showed the air fuel curves on all of them, and the power was the same, the air fuel was the same, so there was no change in brake specific. I've watched several tests on plugs, and the most voltage to come through the plug was in copper core. Daniel, the guys from Jacobs Electronics used to come by with a pressurized cylinder and show how much power their ignition amplifier was making, the Pro Street version or whatever, and that you could put a bunch of pressure in there and make the other plugs and the other systems extinguish the jump, and theirs wouldn't. And so that was a good demonstration for them. But does that really tell us what's happening? They're trying to cure misfires there. I don't change plugs anymore. I wait till they misfire. Calvin's new videos about extracting head bolts from the 4200 seems like his experience is about the same as yours. Mine comes to snapping about every single one. I've talked to Calvin many times about that, about the 4200s. He's like, yeah, they just. I've tried all kinds of different ways. Oh, like you gotta tighten it first and then loosen it. You gotta just use an impact. You gotta go forward and backward and forward and backward. Just all the different things. They're just in there, and the bolt and the block are just very grabby, and so the yield strength of the bolt is not as much as the grabbiness. That's technical too. Richard, I know one thing for the last couple of years, my 85 GLH turbo had a stumble on tip-in, but I just replaced the coil. No more stumble. A healthy coil is great. It is. That's having coil energy is very important. Adequate ignition is easy under ideal conditions in a dyno cell. Maybe the difference would be more drastic in poor fuel mixture and under time. So you think one of those plugs would be better than the other if we had a less than optimum, if we detune the motor? So, Rachel, you still have a Jacobs ignition system on your Quad 4? I think I have one. I think I have one of their Super Street ones or their Pro Street ones laying around somewhere in a box. So, Dean, you won the poll at 96%. I like playing with the MSC display. So you want a 500,000 SCAP? I used to like those. They had those displays in the old super shops too, so you can make it arc. So I think we can go ahead and close our poll. Obviously, brisk plugs are not overly used, at least not from the group in here. So Dean, you win, I guess. Win or lose, or one of those things is happening, that's for sure. Okay, interesting. So that's better. Just closed out one of my positions. just making money hand over fist. Just made $2. Winning. I use Bosch most of the time. I used one Bosch in my conglomeration of plugs, and it worked fine. It was just happened to be one just laying around somewhere. With the bad coil, the GLH only likes platinum tips, and probably would obviously like less gap too. U groove header plugs or shorty plugs, yeah. So depending on whether you have a small block Chevy angle plug head or a straight plug head, and which header you have. Seriously, isn't a quality spark a spark regardless of the plug type? It is. That's the thing. That's what we're talking about. We always talk about the big things versus the small things, and the big things is, did the spark jump the gap? If it did that, making it jump better or faster or stronger is the next little thing. And if it did jump the gap, did it do enough to get all of the burn that it's supposed to get? It's obviously not going to get all the burn. If it got all the burn, that would be fantastic. We would have really good mileage and all that stuff. But if it gets, if it does what it's supposed to do, and we add more energy to it, like we were talking about with the throttle body size, and we get more energy to it, did it do any more? Maybe not. Yes, plasma ignition. So, family, you didn't have good luck with the E3s on your 454? A lot of plug companies offer race-specific plugs. Yeah, the Denso Iridiums are like that. And then Champion has race plugs. In fact, I think 2 of the Champions that I use were Champion race plugs. Window stickers for the win. I'm glad you brought up the coil. Wazanda to be. I do want to check that on the Omni, because I think I'm sure that's an old 80s used coil. So that's one thing you definitely want to have, a good coil. And maybe I'll even put, after we obviously get it certified, maybe an ignition amplifier on there. Because the hotter spark. Spark, and then we'll put less gap, obviously, in the plugs. But see, that's the thing I wonder for. Somebody sent me an email about an emissions test that they did with changing spark plugs, and I didn't get the whole picture there, but I think he was saying that the iridium plugs were improved the emissions or something. I think that was the takeaway. Did you find a G head for David to cut up? We didn't need to give him one. He already has a cut up head section. And I think that he said that the G head is done too. Car Farm, the Bomni uses a traditional distributor edition, so there's 2 gaps to jump. Does it have is that an electronic ignition on there, or is it a points? I can't remember now. You have to understand with the resistor, it has a gap in the porcelain part of the plug. That's the resistance, right? I thought it had a bad coil spark plugs on the Spirit when I first got it. Turns out the HEP was bad. What the HEP? Ran 40,000 on my NA46 4-valve NA. Would blow flames out from first to second under heavy acceleration. Bad mileage as well. Put the plugs back to spec. Better mileage. So why would it blow a flame out with less plug gap? That doesn't make any sense. Alan, you're reminding me about live chat. Thank you. I'm gonna put a post-it up there. Yo, Richie, live chat that. When TIG welding, how I grind my tungsten makes a huge effect on the type of spark plug. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Sharp. The spark likes to initiate from a very sharp edge, and that's why they're talking about these multi-faceted umbrella octopus kind of things, or the U groove, or they're giving lots of sharp edges. That's why they put U grooves or slots or V's or all of those things. You could file the electrode on a regular gap plug down to a fine point, and that would jump too. But if it was already jumping versus doing that, you should see no gain. If it wasn't jumping and you did that and it made it jump, then you should see a gain. Run 25,000 now on TR7IXs, boosted, no issues. Yeah, usually less plug gap tends to cure misfires. Depends on chamber design more than anything else. Protruding or non-protruding electrodes is the first thing to get right. I tested that on the tapered seat plug versus the gasketed plug. The gasketed plug drew the spark plug back compared to the tapered seat plug, put it farther in. So we'll see what happens there. What's the most bulletproof plug? I've never shot at any spark plugs. It would be hard for me to know that. With higher octane fuel affect the test, it's harder to light off. Higher octane fuel isn't harder to light off. Higher octane fuel just has greater resistance to detonation, but the flame travel on different octane fuels, you can have a high octane that would light off faster. So those two things are not the same things. So Dean, you want a revolving spark plug? What plug lasts the longest one? Other people would know more than I do. I'm sure the OEMs probably have a better feel for that because they do that sort of durability testing. But I'm sure it's going to be a precious metal plug. It's going to be a platinum or double platinum. The stuff that comes from, look at any of the OEMs where they're recommending a plug change only after 100,000 miles. That's the plug that I would look at. Those, I think that the OEM AC Delcos probably last a long time on the LS. A tungsten, depleted uranium prong. How conductive is tungsten? Is it as good as solid gold like I have my plugs? My problem with misfires are from those flat distributor caps on the Vortec 350s. Yeah, you don't want it arcing inside the distributor, that's for sure. Microwave diode and ferrite bead. I know in Jacobs Electronics book, that's what they were talking about, was some sort of microwave ignition, that would be the ultimate thing. Gold plug won't last very long. I know, but when you got that big YouTube money. Remember LT1 was when I first saw GM advertise 100,000 mile plug changes. That's a lot. Laser ignition is the new thing. I want a laser ignition that goes in with like the little disco ball and just shoots lasers all over the place so that we get like complete even burn everywhere. The caps cost more than the old school caps in HEI. That's on the Vortec motor. Figures. Make them cost more and less reliable. It's a win-win. Mike, how did the kerosene work on that 258 for an octane booster? So, Russell, you want to see the tungsten plugs happen now? Yep, big freaking laser ignition. I don't think Jacobs is in business anymore. I don't think. I haven't heard anything from him for a long time. Recal's in the house. So we've got about 5 more minutes, and then I gotta get going. I'm cutting all of these short. I got so much to do, so little time. Bear, 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 bear. Do we got questions? I bet there was 0. Do you sharpen the spark plugs like you sharpen your TIG rod? I stay with the AC Delco and I had any trouble. The AC Delco, the factory stuff works good. So Gothic magneto, are magneto ignitions hard on spark plugs? I've never run them on anything. So Anarchy, you think side gap's worth 90 horsepower? So Sinister, 190,000 miles on the original copper core plugs. Death Star laser ignition, that's right. Oh, kerosene's getting pricey now. Everything is. The magnetos need close gap. I know you probably don't want to get zapped by a magneto, right? Richard, I'm going to get a video of my piston rocking the bore. Is it a stock LS or something? I'd be surprised if an LS piston was rocking in the bore because they don't normally wear the bore or the piston out. Oh, the spark plugs are harder than the magnetos, the other way around. Okay. What about top fuel magnetos? They run dual mags on those, right? Oh, forged pistons. Alan, is it new stuff that you put in there? I mean, it could have, I don't know, 5,000s or so piston to wall. 88 amps. It takes less than that to kill you, right? Turbo sensor. Still having problems with spark plugs around 25. PSI gaps are at 14. No aftermarket coils available. Turbo sensor, if you can change the dwell time in, I don't know what ECU you're using. A lot of times we have dwell control in there. If you can do that, it needs to be around 4 or 4.5 milliseconds. I don't know what coil you're using. If you're using a single coil, that could be a problem. Maybe you could do a coil and plug. If you don't have an ignition amplifier, that's definitely a good idea, especially if you have a single coil. An old motor just got heads and just got the heads off and found the issue. What motor is it, Alan? Turbo sensor, you have 4 coils. So you need to send more ignition energy, more voltage to the coil. I haven't run MSD iridium plugs on anything, but we just ran iridium plugs. Work cruiser Marine 4.3 liter Vortec has 27 degrees total timing from the factory. We don't run usually, I think on that 4.3 Vortec, I'm going to say that we were 29 was probably where it wanted to make peak power at. The Vortec head wants a lot less timing than a older small block. Let's go here, 4.3 liter. That's a blower. We don't want that. Final 224 cam. Test description. Gearing rods. No, I take that back. This is showing 33 degrees of timing. That seems like a lot. Test description. Yeah, it's showing 33, so you can try it. That 7 a.m. thing has changed up a bit. Yeah, I can't do it at 7 because I'm trading at 7. Analogy wires, those we use those from back in the day. $570 turbo motor, swapping 799 heads from 317s. That should help. I don't know why they would be rocking unless have you crushed the skirts on them or something. Turning a Vortex mag while putting it back in the engine and holding it by the cap. Yeah, that's probably not good. Ford spec for the 4.6 flex fuel is 52. Is that the plug gap that you're talking about? I've been hit with an HEI in the dyno, and it would not let me while the motor was running, and it would not allow me to let go. It's not fun. They rock front to back? Are they moving on the pin? Scott, I'm not trading on one stock. We're trading lots and lots of different stocks. So idle time. I'm curious how, when you did the plug change, how you know that you got, how did you log better throttle response and torque and better mileage? Did you, I mean, I don't know how you could, short of dyno testing, I don't know how you could tell that that the power was better unless you went to the track and did something. Struner, that would actually be an interesting test. Run really, really long spark plug wires and see if we have to adjust the timing to offset that. So you're thinking that they're Gen 3 rods is you're gonna have to pop one of the pistons out to find out which one seems to be rocking the most. If this piston's rocking, don't bother knocking. See if it's rocking and see if it's see if the hole in the piston has elongated or something, or if the rod has, or if they put too small of a pin in there. Took long wires off my Magnum Hemi and put short wires on and got a noticeable jump in torque. I always question people when they tell me that something makes more power and they don't have any dyno results to show that. trading reindeer stock. My wife actually told me, because she's a teacher, she told me an interesting thing about reindeer, that the male reindeers lose their antlers during the winter, and the females keep it, so that if Santa's sleigh was being pulled by reindeer and they all had antlers, it was not being pulled by any male reindeer. You know, logic. What's the largest duration cam you can fit in a L33 without doing valve reliefs? Somewhere in the mid 230s at 50 on the intake, 230 to 235 range seems to be, depending on what the LSA is. Do the LT valve covers fit Vortec motors? I don't know. Are they both center bolt? Factory duals at 2. Yeah, we don't. All of our LS stuff we run at 4, 4.5. Drop in ohms will result in increase in amp or voltage, so it's possible to see a performance gain. Is that depreciation by changing the wire length? Or deprecation, okay, by changing the wire length? It might be, but again, we were talking about, does it already have enough to do it, and the amount that you're changing is still within the range of it can still do what it's supposed to do. So then you don't see any change. Even though you did make a change, it still, like I said, has more than enough to do what it needs to do. Missed the live feed yesterday, but watch it later. Nice to see your chat the other day, inspiring another tech talk. On the 2.2 stuff, is that what it was? Thinking the bore might be out of round. That's rare on the LS stuff, but it's not impossible. So tonight, what I want to talk about is, because it's time for me to go, tonight what I want to talk about is water-meth injection. So apparently I've angered the water-meth community from the testing that I've done, and they want to see a test of water-meth injection, like pre-turbo stuff. They're telling me that will cure everything. I've been told that the water-meth injection, even running through an intercooler, will go through the intercooler without any puddling, and that it will have even distribution in the intake manifold. So I have to test that to see. I'm pretty certain that pre-water meth in terms of power is going to be better than pre-turbo water meth would be better than post-turbo water meth. But I'm still a little skeptical on it not puddling when it hits an intercooler. And also I'm still unsure about the I'm unsure of the distribution in the intake manifold, because if an intake manifold already has bad distribution, is it going to somehow cure that? I think that the logic behind it is that they're flashing the meth. So maybe if we did a methanol only injection, and it would flash it all and turn it into some sort of gas, and then it all gets in there and gets in there better. I haven't not tested it. I don't know. The only way to know for sure, nobody has showed me, hey, look, here are AO2s that we've run in a dedicated, real world testing thing. Not that you ran it in your car and that it worked, because that still doesn't tell me. We've run carbureted applications that work in a car, and we still have an air fuel difference of 1.5 or 2 air fuel points. And I don't know how it still works, but it does. That's what I was telling Brule. I don't want to test this anymore. I don't want to look at AO2s because it's so far off that it just scares me in one particular cylinder or 2 particular cylinders. So I want to test that and see what it does and see if there's a change, like I did with the nitrous. And when we did the nitrous distribution test, we saw the same thing. The intake manifold itself was not right before you inject anything into it. And then when you inject stuff into it, it's also not right. So I want to see if this does anything. And if it's just, hey, look, it's good enough that it works, or if there's something to that. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that this is going to gain power pre-turbo stuff. But then the other thing, and I think we had a guy on here that was not happy with me, but my conversation was that I want to tell both sides of this. When I test an intake manifold, it's a single plane and it picks up more power. The single plane guys are like, oh yeah, but it makes more power. This is great. This is the best. Well, but it also loses power down here. So we tell everything that happens, the good and the bad, so people can make an informed decision. Same thing with water methanol injection. Is it obviously people have used it and it works and it lowers the temperature and lowers the detonation threshold. But does it do it evenly in all the cylinders in our testing? It hasn't done that yet. So I'd like to do more testing and find out if that's going to improve it. But that'll be our discussion for tonight. Because then the other problem is injecting stuff into the impeller. It's just turbos don't tend to like that, but you know. Have you done the oval track camshafts? I've done a little bit of that. Let's see. So one more, and then I got to get going. I'm so interested in the gap question. What was your question about the gap? I already have a video up on changing spark plug gap. Hope for the slant 6 to come. I would like that to happen, and the 4200. And on that note, I have to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I'll be back tonight. People will be able to yell at me about water-meth injection, and hopefully I'll be able to test some of that coming up. I have the turbo set up for the LS, obviously, and for others as well. So it shouldn't be too hard to test it. It will be interesting to see what happens when we do it. And I know that I already know what's going to happen because I'm not going to test it at 25 or 30 pounds because that's just silly. And that's going to be the thing. I'm going to test it at 7 pounds or 8 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever and run it. And then the thing is going to be, yeah, but you got to run it at 20 pounds or 25 pounds or whatever the complaints are going to be. That's all part of it. That's all part of the fun. I will see you guys all tonight. Bam, 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 bam.